Do you ever feel like your mind can't stop racing? Like it's so busy that you cannot stop thinking? You're not alone, and you're not powerless to do anything about it. This episode is about clearing mental clutter so that you can find the space to think clearly. It's part of a series of episodes. This is the first one, and this one is focused on how to stop projecting conversations in your head. So if you have been imagining conversations you want to have, or replaying conversations that you've already had, this episode is for you. You're listening to Pure Light, where we explore how to become the highest version of yourself so that you feel confident, happy, and free. My name is Ailey. I'm a coach and a Kundalini yoga and meditation teacher. This is episode 61. So there are a lot of things that can be circling around in your mind, like things you need to do or to-do lists, or conversations that have happened, or things that have happened, so events from the past, and also conversations that you want to have, or things that are coming up in your life, and obviously both personal and work stuff for all of those. And then there's also the layer of judgment that the mind often adds to those things with negative self-talk. And so all of that can add up to a lot going on in the mind, a really busy mind. And it's hard to make decisions and know what you want when you're in that state, when your mind is constantly spinning and rehashing things. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about how to clear mental clutter related to the conversations in your head. And in the next episode, I'm going to talk about how to clear mental clutter related to everything that you have to do, so your to-do list. And then in the one after that, I'm going to talk about how to clear mental clutter in terms of negative self-talk. So how to stop beating yourself up. So right now, I want to talk about what was going on in my mind a few years ago when I failed a promotion at work. So I've talked about this event in my life before from the perspective of reframing failure in the episode called The Gifts of Failure, which was episode 52. And now I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of mental clutter. So what was going on in my mind at the time and how to stop obsessing about stuff in your head, and more specifically, how to stop having conversations in your head. So when I found out that I didn't get that promotion, it was a bit of a shock. And there were a lot of questions that came up. The first one was, what the fuck? Like, why is this happening? And then after that, there was stuff like, who betrayed me? Like, who lied to me? Because everyone that I work for told me that they had supported me. And, ultimately it ended up with stuff like, why is this happening to me? Like, why is this my life? And there was also a lot of heavy emotion that came up along with that. There was anger, and there was sadness and disappointment. And there was also fear of what people would think, because everyone knew that I was up for it. And this was before I started meditating. So I was not into yoga at this point in time. I was not into meditation. At this point, I actually thought meditation was pretty insane and a complete waste of time. So it was not in like my spectrum of reality. And so at that point in time, I really had no tools to deal with the insanity that was going on in my mind. So my mind was constantly searching for answers to all of those questions because it was trying to explain what happened or find a way to explain it. And so it was constantly iterating and just going in like an infinite loop. And for those of you who are not familiar with that term, an infinite loop, if you've ever programmed anything, or like when someone programs something like computer programming stuff, you can write loops to repeat certain tasks. And there are ways that you can write it so that it never stops. And that's kind of what my mind was like at that point in time. It was like an infinite loop of constantly circling through conversations that I had had throughout the year about, my upcoming like potential promotion, and also conversations that I wanted to have to figure out what had happened. And so my mind kept pulling up events and conversations from the past and projecting those conversations that I wanted to have. And it was completely overwhelming. I actually remember going to a movie, I think it was the weekend after I got the news, and I was in the theater, but I did not watch the movie. Like, I have no idea what happened in that movie. I couldn't pay attention to it for more than a couple of seconds at a time because my mind would not shut up. Like, that is how bad it was. And to this day, I have no idea what happened in that movie because I didn't see it. Like, even though I was there, my mind could not focus on it because it was just constantly spinning. And what made things worse was that I started to get insomnia. So I couldn't sleep because my mind just kept going and going. And so not only was I not present with what was going on around me, like at the movie, but I was also just like, I was barely getting any sleep, which made things even worse. And I went to a wedding in Ottawa while all of this was happening. So this was maybe 2 weeks after I found out that I didn't get the promotion. And ironically, I went there with my boyfriend or my boyfriend at the time, who he had gotten the exact same promotion that I wanted, but didn't get. And then the bride also had gotten that promotion and I hadn't. So, but all three of us were up and I was the only one who didn't get it. And anyway, I was not in the mood to celebrate anything that night, even though I was really happy for the couple, just because I was going through so much pain, you know, the anger and everything. And I ended up drinking a lot at that wedding because I needed it. Like, I didn't know how else I could be there and be happy and social. And even like, so that night when I went to bed after the wedding, I still couldn't sleep. Like, my mind was still wide awake and spinning. Even though I had had a good time at the wedding, I was actually the first one out on the dance floor. And that was a first for me. And I suspect it was alcohol related. But anyway, after that, I still couldn't sleep that night. And so because my mind was spinning and I was like, I need to do something to make it stop, I pulled out my laptop and I started writing out everything that was running through my mind. So all of these imaginary conversations I was having with people. And that was a huge turning point for me because it allowed me to start really processing everything that I was thinking and feeling, at least at a deeper level than I already had. And so what I did that night was I kept writing as long as the words kept coming, like as long as there was some conversation playing in my mind. So I was typing like mad. And then eventually I ran out of steam and I was actually able to sleep for a few hours. And after that, whenever I found myself getting caught up in conversations in my head or whenever I couldn't sleep, I would do the same thing. So I would write out whatever that conversation was. And as a result, when I did end up having conversations with people in real life, I was a lot more grounded and centered in them instead of showing up with the anger and the sadness. Like it was still there, but the intensity of it had really dropped. And so I was able to be level-headed and calm and professional when I talked to leadership and stood up for myself and said, you know, like, how did this happen? And the person who was the lead partner for our division at the time told me that he was proud of me because no one was expecting me to stand up for myself. I guess they were just expecting me to suck it up and like take it and not say anything. But instead, I was able to articulate my position and basically defend myself in a way that was still professional and calm and centered. And all of that happened because I was able to start processing stuff in my mind by pulling out my laptop that night and writing stuff out after that wedding in Ottawa. So when you write down the stuff that's been circling in your mind, it increases your level of awareness of it. There's a shift. Like, it's no longer compulsive thinking, or at least as compulsive as it was before. Like, for me, those conversations in my head kept going after that first night, but it's something that happened like in waves. So it would come and then I would write it out and then the intensity would lessen and then it would come again and the same thing would happen. And each time it did, my mind got quieter and quieter as I was able to let those thoughts go. So writing stuff down also gives you the opportunity to decide what you want to do about it. Like, do you want to have that conversation or do you just want to let it go? Like, do you need to process it more for yourself before talking to that person? And it's also good to ask yourself, like, how do you want to show up for that conversation? And what do you need to do to make that happen? Because it's up to you to decide how you want to move forward. But ultimately, to get those conversations in your mind off your mind, you either need to decide to let it go or do something about it, as in have that conversation. And when you see what you're dealing with by writing it down, it makes it a lot easier to make that decision with a greater level of mental clarity. Like for me, I ended up talking to most of the people that I was having those conversations in my head with, like in real life. There was one person that I really chose to limit how much conversation I had in real life because I realized it wasn't worth my energy. I realized that really what I needed with that person was just, I needed to be professional and I needed to make sure that I had strong boundaries. And that was it. But with everyone else, I actually had the conversation and, everything worked out to a point where I was happy with my relationships at work. And that was very important to me at the time because work was a huge priority. So when it feels like your mind is spinning on a conversation, write it down. And it doesn't really matter if you write it on your laptop or by hand. I think either could work. And I suspect writing it by hand would probably be even more cathartic. But either way, try it. Do whichever way will work better for you because it'll help you let go of constantly replaying it, which means you'll find more mental space and figure out what you want to do about it all. And you'll figure that out from a place of greater mental clarity. And another thing that can help with clearing mental clutter is conscious breathing, because the breath is the thing that connects your mind and your body. I talked about this before and the importance of the breath as it relates to activity in the mind in a previous episode about worry, which was episode 12. I'll include a link to that in the show notes, as well as links to the episodes that have some short and sweet meditations from Kundalini Yoga. Because if your mind is constantly going, it will really help if you take just a couple of minutes to do a short meditation or some breathing to help it let go of whatever it is that it's spinning on. So you can find all of those at purelightpodcast.com in the show notes for episode 61. So as I mentioned earlier, there will be a couple more episodes coming up on clearing mental clutter. So if you want to make sure that you hear them, subscribe to Pure Light wherever you listen to podcasts. The next one will be about how to stop thinking about your to-do list. So if that's something that you tend to obsess about, be sure to subscribe to make sure that you hear that. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, may you be guided by your light.